In this lesson, we'll learn how we can start to use the Maya render view. Okay, so this render view is an area of Maya where we, as the name suggests, will be doing a lot of our rendering and actually seeing a lot of the rendered feedback from our scene. Now, the render view is something that you've probably already seen at some point or another during this training, and there may be a few points in this lesson that you have maybe already seen in previous lessons regarding the render view, but we're also going to talk about a lot of things regarding the render view that you've not had a chance to see yet. So the render view, in case you haven't already had a chance to use it, is going to be found right up here. So there's actually two little buttons that relate very closely to each other. The first button is the one that allows us to actually take a render, which is going to be this first little clapboard icon, or this one that's furthest to the right. So you can see we click on this, and it will start to render out our scene. Okay, depending on the scene that you have, this render may go very, very quickly. It may take a really, really long time. Depends on the scene, and it depends on the hardware of your system. So if you close that out, we can either get that window back by starting another render, or we could click on this little clapboard icon with this little window behind it. If we click on that, that'll actually open up the render view without having to perform another render. Now, the render view will render whatever view is currently active. So if I were to jump to my side view, let's say this one over here on the right, and go up and start a new render, what we should see is a render that now takes place from this same orthographic view. Okay, and we can see that's exactly the case. Same goes if we were to render this from the front. There we go. Now, we can also perform renders directly within this render view. So you can see we have this same icon right up here, this same little clapboard icon that we have up here. So at any point in time, we can start up a render. We can just simply pull up in our render view and maybe start a render from here. Now, the thing to keep in mind is that anytime we have our render view closed and we start a new render from this little icon over here, it will render whatever viewport we currently have active. However, if we open up the render view and start a render at this point, it will continue to render whatever view we currently have active. In this case, if you look in the camera, you can see we're rendering from the front. So, even if I have this front or this camera viewport active, if I come in and render this, you'll see that the view does not change. Again, because I already had this window open whenever I started the render. So from this point, you have one of two options. You could close this out, and now with the window closed out, you can open up a fresh render view, start your render, and at this point now it should render from the proper view. There we go. Another option, and this is the one that I actually prefer to use, is rather than closing out this render view, we could just go to render and then choose to render whatever view that we want. So now if we decided to render from a side view, just click on side, and as soon as you click on that, the render should start, and it will start to render from this new perspective or this new direction that we've chosen. So this starts to become sort of useful if you do have multiple cameras in your scene, or if you want to render from sort of a temporary camera. You could definitely do that, and it, again, becomes pretty easy to do. Now, one of the things that I find to be probably one of the most useful features of the render view is the fact that we can save and compare renders for later comparison or usage or whatever we might want to do with that. So if I were to render from my shot cam, which is this current view, let's say I'm rendering this out, and at some point I decide, well, maybe I'd like to see what this looks like with a slightly different material, or maybe a slightly different color material. So if I come in and grab, let's say, this body that has the material on it, press Ctrl A to open up my attribute editor, and let's say we come in and start to make some adjustments to this object's color. So maybe we want to give it maybe a little bit more of an orange color, or something maybe just dramatically different. Maybe we give it a little bit more of a blue, maybe something along those lines. Now, if we render this out, this is going to erase whatever we currently have. However, we could come in and save an image for comparison. So if we choose this keep image, you can see now we have this little slider down here. And the next time I render out, we should be able to see the new material changes, or any changes that we make. There we go. And now we can compare that to what we had before. And we can have as many comparisons as we want. So we could save this image for comparison. And again, maybe try something really, really dramatically different. There we go. So again, that image was saved. Now we re-render. There we are. Very nice. So you can, again, stack as many of these up, and it starts to become just a really, really useful tool for checking your lighting, checking your materials, checking the changes that you're making from one render to the next, and you can really start to get a little bit better idea of the changes that you're making and whether the changes that you are making are having a positive or a negative effect on the overall look of your render. Now, another feature that starts to become really neat is the fact that we don't necessarily have to render this entire image if we are only focusing on one area. So, for example, if I were changing the lighting on a certain object or changing the materials on a certain object, what if I just really wanted to render this little area that has the area that I want to look at, rather than re-rendering everything? So what we could do is, let's say we grab one of these little pieces of this front gun here, and let's make a quick little change to the material. So let's maybe give this something pretty dramatically different. There we are. And now what we could do is draw out what's called a region. So this can be done really without clicking on anything. Just simply draw out a region. You can see this little area becomes highlighted in red. Now up here in the render view, we have this little icon that is the icon to just render whatever we have in that current region. So now if I hit render, you can see it's not going to go through the process and waste my time rendering this entire image all over again. We just have to render this one little piece that we're concerned about. So again, becomes a really, really nice time-saving feature. And if we no longer want to render inside of this region, or if we want to now re-render the image all over again, just simply click on the little clapboard icon right next to it, and that will now render the entire image. Okay, and once we have everything looking the way that we want, if we decide at any point in time that we no longer need these old comparison images, we can choose to come in and just simply throw those away, or we could right-click on this icon and just tell Maya to remove all of our saved rendered images. Okay, now in addition to having our images right here, what we could do is actually save this out. So we could just go to File, Save Image, and actually choose to save out whatever image we have currently rendered in this viewport. Okay, so that's a look at how we can start to utilize this render view inside of Maya.